Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becky's Anonymous live stream. It's May 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the economics of abolition. And we're so excited to have Malia Lazu with us today to help us work through all of this. And I'll introduce her in a second, and we'll get to hear more about her extensive experience working in this area. But wanted to just take a moment and share why at Becky's Anonymous we think this is such an important topic and why we're so excited to talk about this. So the economics of abolition are a great opportunity for us to really think about how are we not just working to end white supremacy, but what are the systems that we're building as an alternative? And particularly as white women who in a lot of ways benefit from the current systems, how do we use a lot of those resources that a lot of us gain from our privilege to help build those systems? And that's particularly why we're talking about that at tax season right now. Some of our members are thinking about how can I use my tax money towards things that really have the impact that I wanna intend. And so we'll touch on that. I want to just quickly remind people that Wednesday we'll have our growth circles to be able to dive deeper into what we've learned from Malia and share a lot of the actions also that we'll touch on. And so thank you so much for being with us, Malia. As I had shared with her before we started, Malia's been on our list of people we wanted to have in these discussions from the beginning. So we're super excited to have you. And just as a brief introduction of who you are, or a little snapshot of who you are, Malia Lazu is the founder of the Lazu Group, is an award-winning tenured strategist in diversity and inclusion, has sparked deep economic development and investment in urban entrepreneurship for over 20 years. In her most recent role as EVP and Regional President at Berkshire Bank, Malia worked to generate wealth for communities by expanding access to capital and spurring economic growth, especially in communities of color that have traditionally been left behind. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Would love to hear, do you have anything that you want to add to that introduction? And would love
the only thing I think I would add is that I started off as a community organizer, and I like to, think of myself as that. So no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, my goal is to bring, communities together to find their own power, to dismantle supremacy, and to be able to become self-sufficient and self-determinative. So, wherever I am, that's what I'm doing.
Love it. And so that really helps really inform this next question of how does that experience impact kind of how you think about the economics of abolition and how you approach being a part of that?
So, first off, I think that being an organizer just really, I think it shapes how I think about power and how I think about change, right? So I think, for a lot of folks, and we see advocacy as the way to go, right? We're going to advocate for this group. And that's great. And, white people should absolutely advocate for things. But the real juice, right? The real place where we want to get the squeeze is the communities that are the most affected, need to be, as our Congresswoman in Boston, Congresswoman Presley so wonderfully says, and I think is the motto of any organizer, those closest to the problem need to be closest to the solution. And when I think about economics, and I just think about how Black and brown and, and Asian, it's not just Black people, but we're the most affected. I'm gonna use us as the focus here. How even the very reason why we came to this country was to exploit our bodies, right? Was for our bodies to be exploited for someone else's economic gain. And the fact of the matter is, 400 years later, that hasn't changed, right? The school systems, ensure that we will be in a certain place. The criminal justice system, ensures that we can continue to be free labor once they get us in jail. And, so much about even our modern day economics devalues people of color, devalues women, exploits us for the gain of a few cisgendered white men. And so when I think about the economics of abolition, I really think about how do we get those most affected by the criminal justice system, those most affected by the education industrial complex and all those complexes that we talk about. How do we get them to be at the center of ownership and the center of economic growth? And that's when I think we'll finally start repairing, right, some of the harm that's been done. The last thing I want to say that I often think about is, when the Civil War was over, right? We were talking about 40 acres and a mule, right? We were talking about, during Reconstruction, there were Black people in Congress, there were Black people owning things, right? And the country had a chance. It wasn't that we never figured it out. We actually figured it out. We had, we had Tulsa, right? We had Black Wall Street in Tulsa. We had 36 Black Wall Streets, throughout the states that were, part of the United States at that time. We had ownership. We had these things, and then because of lost cause, right? Because of this idea, we lost it all. And so, anything that we're talking about today is because we fucked up on it after the Civil War. So I also want people to know, like, this isn't some new thing. Like the government after the Civil War knew that there were going to have to be some type of repair for, the Black bodies that they had enslaved in order for them to catch up. And we did that. And then it was once again taken away. And we can go through almost every generation and point out how, Black people, brown people were able to get themselves into, into ownership and into hope. And once again, it was taken away, probably by violent force or by governmental intervention.
Mhm. And I think that's a super important point, that while it's that we messed up or, fucked up, it's not really that we just oops messed up, right? It was a response of sort of, oh, if we repair, that means that we're not going to have racialized capitalism anymore. And so white people were upset about that. And it was a response, right? A repression to sort of seeing that. And I think what's really and I appreciate, you pointing out that this has happened at different moments, but that is such a crucial moment. I think what I appreciate in what you're saying is, how do we also look at that moment as you said, like, we can do this. There are ways you can do this. And the reason we aren't where we want to be is because people have actively fought against it, not because we've met, we don't know what we're doing. But I think also what's helpful in those moments of history is for us as white people to reflect that response, there were sort of extreme sort of white supremacists responding to that. But there are those sort of white moderates that help tip the scale to full repression. And who are those people? And what, who are we as white people in this moment? Which white person are you being in this moment?
I love that. What white person are you being, right? And I think about, right, like, yeah, the complicity of the North, right? The complicity of so many white people. And I think, the ultimate okie doke is that, right? Is this idea that you can be poor white and still think I'm your problem. Or you can be, a wealthy white man and see me as a threat. Like it's the mind games that have been played on white people for them to hate Black people and hate people of color and see us as the enemy, when in fact we have a common enemy, right? And it's called capitalism, right? It's like, Tim Wise, for whatever you think of him, and I know some folks like him, some folks don't, he said this thing that I hadn't even really thought about it that way. And I was like, oh yeah, that's really a mind fuck, which was, he said, you know, they got white people, poor whites during slavery, to be for slavery when they could have used those jobs picking cotton, right? Like, and I was just like, right, like, you needed jobs. You weren't getting those jobs because, you know, we were the forced labor, and yet you still pick the side of the person that's making sure those things happen to both of us, you know? And it's really, really important, I think, that the average white person understands how much power they have in their whiteness, right? Like whiteness is the commodity, right? Like that's the commodity. I mean, that's why we can get into colorism and, you know, all of these things. And so, you know, Becky's Anonymous, you should know how powerful one white woman strategically placed can be, you know, and that power is real. And part of what's happening now, I think, is because of, you know, things like Becky's Anonymous, and, you know, because of the modeling of the behavior you ladies are doing. And one of the reasons why I'm like so happy to be on this show and, like, you know, so honored that I was, you know, on your list in the beginning, is because this is the modeling of behavior that needs to be seen, right? Not that you guys should get awards or anything like that, but that white people who are willing to intervene, to, you know, I say that allyship to me looks like you putting your body in front of mine. It doesn't look like you holding my hand while I'm getting beat in the face, right? It looks like you actually, John Brown to me, like it, like as close, you know, like John Brown is what all white allyship, you know, should be striving to, right? And, you know, and there are people who do it amazingly well. You know, and I think there's more and more white people who are understanding how to use their voice and how to use their privilege. You know, I have a white mother, and I like to say, like, my white mother, she's very much a white mother. She wears Chico's clothes, you know, she drives a Benz, like, she's very much this white lady. But like, she is a white woman who uses her race and her privilege, and her loudmouthedness, for good. And, you know, and she knows she can get away with things, and so she will. I mean, you know, we don't need to get into total stories of my mom and police, but what I can say is that my mom's a cop watcher, and she will make it a point. She will pull in behind, you know, on her little Mercedes, get out in her Chico's clothes, right? Like, and, you know, and she's literally said things about, like, oh, what are you going to do? Shoot me? Like, you know, and that sort of intervention, right? Like, and like my stepfather likes to say, you know, they let the guy go and then they just grab him a mile down the road when she's driven off. But regardless, they know that folks are watching now, right? They know that within their own tribe. And that's what's so important about not being complicit, because if you feel something in your heart and you don't say it, what you're saying is, yeah, we're still cool with this racism. Let's keep carrying on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think what has been brought up for me is this feeling of, if you, and this is a little simplification, but, you know, selling out your Black, brown, in this, you know, here Beck's sister, makes it easier for you to sell out your, you know, your white sisters and families. And we're seeing how in Becky's Anonymous, how much of our inability to be in relationship with each other is a huge, it's not the only hurdle, but is a huge hurdle to us really being able to participate fully in, you know, ending white supremacy and building alternatives, but how that's our work, right? Like,
Right.
we can't look to brown and, you know, Black people to heal us. We have to help, you know, each other heal. But we can learn still, right? And share that. And that's
Yes,
how
and
do we
come
model that
together
more?
and celebrate our own evolution, right? You know, I mean, you know, I'm so glad that you talk about, like, the outcome of, you know, racism and brutal capitalism and racialized economies, the effect that it has on white people, right? And part of that is this, you know, this weird definition of community. And, you know, I mean, it's almost so amorphous that it doesn't exist because it's America, and, you know, and all of that stuff. And I think that's part of the reason why white people are so defensive, you know, because even though we don't have power, we're you know, like we have things, like we have moments of happiness, right? Like we have these cultural moments that allow us to you know, to see who we are, and you know, and to have an identity, and you know, to have something that unites us. And you know, it must be a hell of a thing to just be united because of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. And I think I appreciated that, what you know, what you said, how whiteness is the commodity, and how really that's the thing, is that so much of those spaces maybe that white people attach to is kind of, well, this is us. When you dig at the surface, you see that, but this is so built, like this can only exist because it excludes, because it's about your power and your dominance, right? Or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And how, you know, we know that if you're a billionaire in this system, we know what you've done to get there, because as the system exists, you can't be there without that
Right, you
happening.
are not ethical.
You know,
Like there, and I even mean that for the Black billionaires, right? And I want to be clear about this. And you know, I mean, as we're talking about you know, about economics, you know, Black capitalism, you know, mirroring the thing that oppressed us does not mean that we're free, you know? And so, you know, I don't think that you can become a billionaire ethically, period.
Mhm. So switching from kind of what you can't do and what this system is, and I really appreciate, I mean, you just broke it down in about 10 minutes, so thank you for that. So want to get a little bit local, because you're that, you know, your expertise, particularly in the weeds of the local way to do this, is so valuable. And want to just put in context for particularly our members from, you know, the Boston area, but this is an important statistic to think about for everyone everywhere. Do you know this statistic for your local community? But wanted to just share, recently in Boston, it was assessed that Black families in Boston have an average net worth of $8, while white families have an average net worth of $250,000. When this is now a little bit of an old statistic.
Right, but you know, it's
It's
within
the
the
most
census
recent one.
time, right? So things haven't changed that
Yes,
much.
exactly. But I just want, when it did come out, some people might remember, a lot of people thought it was a typo, and you saw journalists and people literally, you know, saying like, I had to reread that, or make sure that was correct. So one, would encourage people to look at, you know, do you know the statistic in your community? But I do think this is a microcosm of the rest of the country, about the inequity. So first want to break that down about, you know, we see a dollar sign, $8 versus 250,000, but would love your elaboration on the difference between kind of money and wealth, and how when we
Yes,
look at that number, it's much bigger than just kind of what I have in my savings account, that
that's
we're
right.
talking about.
That's right. And you know, and I should be honest, right? Or not honest, but I think like there's probably a moment right now where a lot of white people are like, 250,000, right? That's your house. And you got to buy one. You got to get a mortgage. You got to have a steady job. You know, and all of those reasons are probably because of privilege, right? So, you know, a lot of in America, the way wealth is created is around home ownership, right? And so again, we can, you know, go back and look at redlining, right? Which was, you know, government and banks agreeing to literally draw lines around Black neighborhoods, right? We have generational covenants, right? For years where, you know, you would agree to not sell to a non-white person or not sell to someone not in your family. Um, you know, so this exclusion has led to this. So it's not that the average white person in Massachusetts is walking around with 250,000 in their savings account. It's that they were able to get their foot on that first rung of the ladder, which is home ownership. Now, from home ownership, you have equity, right? You can start a business, you can go to college, you can do so much stuff with this idea of this very simple act of getting a mortgage. And when you look at the history of the US, we as Black people were not able to do that regardless of our credit worthiness. You know, like you know, you mentioned that I was a banker, and I was, and one of those things, there was a couple of stats that go along with this stat. And the first one is that 50% of Black and brown people are underbanked versus 19% of whites. So what that lets you know is that a poorer white person will get a mortgage over a Black person who has more money, more collateral, more of the things that should let them get a mortgage first. That's not going to happen, right? So, that's one of the statistics. The second statistic is or not statistic, but point is when you look at, the checklist of getting mortgages, right? It really falls in line with white hegemony, right? It's things like credit scores, right? It's things that are very hard to do well when you're under the white gaze, right? When you're constantly being, either not promoted or, any of those things that happens because of bias. And so, I know that white folks, they definitely in their minds, they have worked hard for what they have. But I think what white people need to remember is like, you've worked hard only within your group, and that there's an entire other America of brown, Black, indigenous, Asian folks that you haven't even started to compete with yet, right? So it's like, you may have worked hard for whites, but you haven't worked hard in standards of actual most, Americans.
Yeah. And I think it brings Kim, my sister and I shared, in our history, we are descendants of someone from the Mayflower. And just the fact that that person came over as an indentured servant, yes, but was able to then be a landowner once he came here because of his whiteness, has totally changed the trajectory of our lives and our families' lives, obviously compared to other non-white people that were existing at the same time in history, and how that's, trickled down. And I really appreciate you highlighting, a lot of times we emphasize education as this way to stratify and how we don't put as much look at home ownership, particularly, I think, because of this, both have a very obviously racist history, but it's interesting how this home ownership piece now is coming out a lot more, particularly with these stories of people changing how their house looks,
Right.
and it being valued differently. And I think what's helpful too, and this is not my message, but a lot of times I hear people when we talk about facts like this, how do we also see the lost potential here? When you hear 50%, right, of people of color are underbanked, that's wasted community investment, right? And brings up this question of sort of, why do we see the community health outcomes that we see when we're neglecting, neglecting's a mild way to put it, but how do we now see the potential in that? And would love to hear from you in your work, ways you've seen kind of those alternatives and that potential used maybe in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was an economist, a woman of color economist at Citigroup. And I want to say this is also why it's important, because when we get into power, we will do things differently. But where bias is costing us $16 trillion. That's a lot of money, right? But we know that, like, why would you lock people up, ensure that they cannot participate in the economy when we know that's what builds an economy, right? Why don't you want all Black and brown communities thriving the way white middle class folks get to? That's just more money in the real economy, right? It also affects the stock market and all of that stuff, right? But Black people have, I don't remember, the number, but it's, it's like whatever trillions of dollars of spending power, right? It's not that we don't have money, it's that we're not allowed to hold on to our money. It's that, like this idea of Black and brown people don't pay back loans, like that's statistically not true, right? So now as a bank, and like what I saw as a bank was, that's how we make money, right? We make money by loaning money, right? I mean, like, yes, we like deposits, whatever, because that helps us loan, all right? Like liquidity helps us loan. So why wouldn't we want more mortgages, right? Why do we just feel the need to take advantage of the Black people or brown people? And that's the racism, right? That's the fact, because America is actually racist, and we don't want Black and brown people to get ahead, and we want America to stay a white Christian country, So I think, all of these stats are important because what they show is that all of the things that we say that we believe in actually is not true, right? This actually isn't about meritocracy, or else we would want to compete with everybody, right? This actually isn't about good credit, or else, there at least 25% of that 50 of that, those Black and brown people have as much of a credit score as anyone else, right? So it's actually about violent exclusion for white supremacy. And I think, especially for like just a lot of like regular white people, like that's probably hard to feel, and that's good. Sit in that for a minute, like, but also understand that our, like, when we think about our country's economy, that we are not the best we can be because of racism. And that's how deep racism is in our head. Again, to keep it local and to go to sports for a second, there's this amazing movie that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar did called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. And it's about the Renaissance Wrens. Well, it's primarily about the Renaissance Wrens, but it's really about the segregated basketball and how there was like Black basketball and white basketball. And so the Renaissance Wrens and the Harlem Globetrotters, who were, minstrels out of Chicago. They weren't even from Harlem, but that's a whole nother conversation, about a white man who was running that team. And we all know them, right? But Renaissance Wrens, we don't know about, which was a Harlem team run by a Black person. They were considered some of the best basketball players in the country, right? Like, but they couldn't play nobody. They could only play Black people. So the Celtics, local us, racist little us, but the players at the time were like, well, we want to play them because the Celtics were considered the best. And so they were like, we want to play the Renaissance Reds. Why? Because we want to know if we are the best, right? Like, we're the best in whites, but we heard about this team in Harlem who can ball. We want to check it out. So it was big rigmarole, obviously, right? Like, folks are like, oh, you can't play Black people, whatever. Celtics, again, used their privilege and was like, no, we want to play Renaissance Reds. So they also realized, like, even with the calls in their favor, right, they were still losing some, it was neck to neck, like, and it was neck to neck within this racist thing. So like, they knew Renaissance Reds are better than us, and they kept on wanting to play them. They went on an exhibition where now we're watching interracial interleague play, and they made sure, like, and then from doing that, they realized that the Renaissance Reds weren't given hotels, or whatever the accommodations were, but also that the promoters would pay the Renaissance Reds in checks, pay the Celtics in cash, and then cancel the checks before the Renaissance Reds. So then they started saying, we're only going to play if we all get paid in cash, right? Like, they started, again, using their privilege, but it wasn't necessarily they didn't get started because of racism. They got started because they wanted to know if they were the best, right? They actually wanted a meritocracy. And when they got into that meritocracy, they saw that they weren't the best, right? And it pushed them to be a better team, to be better players. And actually, some of those players on the Celtics became civil rights activists, right? Like, just watching what was happening, and this is back in the 20s and 30s, another time of, abolition, right? Another time that we're having these conversations, and they became active civil rights activists. So, I say that as an example of what allyship can look like, not because necessarily you want to be an ally, but maybe because you just want your story to be honest, right? Maybe because you just want to actually see what you can do in the real world, and not in this this coddling that white folks get here in the US.
Mm-hmm. So what are other ways? What are other ways we can think about our allyship? Again, from your experience, what are things you've seen that have worked? What are things you've seen like we've learned this is not how we want to do things? And again, speaking to our membership that are white women from many different walks of life, with different types of resources. Would love to hear your thoughts on, tax season as a concrete example. But what are, speaking, I think for a moment, talking to white women, what are these things that you've learned and experienced are things that we can do or maybe not do, make sure we don't make that mistake.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you for that question. And, as white women, are, whether they know it or not, and I know Bill Burr got a little bit of shit on Saturday Night Live, and everyone should go back. You guys would love it. Like, he has this whole shtick about how when white women talk about their oppression, that like they're the white privilege of oppression. Like, and and he's like, I'm thinking your life just sucks a little, more than mine, right? He's like, I don't know, let's talk about it in the hot tub, right? Like, white women are the only thing on earth that can make white children, right? So when you think about how to propagate whiteness, you guys are the key. You are the uterus.
When you said that.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about that, right? No one else can make a white man.
Yeah.
No one else can do that. That's, and that's why your wombs are put in gilded cages, right? That's why you were forced to lose your own agency and not work. But I mean, you talk about the okey doke of white women, right? Like, but part of it is because you hold on to the purity of the white race. And that's powerful, right? If you guys decide to never have another white child, there'll be no more whiteness. Like, think about that, right? Like, so as much as like, yes, you're women, you're in gilded cages, all of this stuff, your uterus is what propagates whiteness. That's power. Now, I'm not trying to tell you what to do with your uterus or who you should have babies with. Have your white babies. They're great too. Just raise them right. But don't lose sight of that power. So now what can white women do? Well, first of all, I have a white mother. She's wonderful. And like, and like I was saying before, like, she is a white woman. She wears Chico's clothes. She's like, drives a Benz. Like, she's very much white, but she intervenes whenever possible. And, and I say that because it is ongoing, and I think for my mother, obviously having a woman of color child, having a child of color, like, my mother wanted to make sure that I was raised with the most pride and confidence, and that I knew who I was, and that I knew what I was worth. And that, I often say, like, she raised me to be a white woman. Like, I have my voice, I take up space, like, I'll be like, excuse me, I need to, like, very much so. And so that's how I do my activism. I'm like, oh, this is bullshit. We ain't dealing with this. Come on, let's go. The interventions of letting folks know, like, your mothers, your grandmothers, and your aunts, we're not down with this shit anymore. And we're going to intervene every time we see it. So I just want to talk personally about a couple of things that I've seen, my mother do in very small ways. And then I'll get to some, some bigger things. But these are the things that you can do, Karen for good. I like to say that my mother will Karen for good. But the first one was, we were at a restaurant in Oregon. This is when she was living in Oregon. And a group of folks, came for work, like, we were sitting at the bar having a drink, and some folks came from work at the bar, and there was a Black woman with them. And, she was obviously like there, but it wasn't included the way we're not, right? Like, and so she, like, no one was really talking to her, and, but she was still a part of the group. And my mom was sitting next to her, and then I was sitting on the other side of my mom. And my mother stopped, like, after a couple of minutes of, like, my mother observing this. And I hadn't even observed it, because I was just chit-chatting about my life, and, like, making sure my mother knew about what was going on in my life. And my mother, like, stopped our conversation dead, turned around to this woman, scooted out her chair, included the woman, and I started asking her about her bracelet, like, whatever it was. She's like, oh my God, I love that bracelet. Where did you get it? The next thing, the Black woman was a part of our crew now. Right. So she was the majority. My mother was the minority. And within 5 minutes, a couple of the white women who were sitting, were like, oh, you made that bracelet? Oh, I didn't really, and then they wanted to get into our conversation, which was way better than the white conversation that was happening next door. And it was this moment of, like, just such pride for me, for my mother, because my mother saw it and she was like, nope, like, this woman is not going to feel this way. Not next to me. Right. Like, not next to me. And, it's moments like that. And I think, now for my mother, maybe because she's had more experience, with people of color or whatever, my mother has no problem talking to Black and brown people. My mother will talk to anybody. She's also Italian from Jersey. So she'll talk to anybody. But, that's an example, of what you can do every day. Like, notice in your work, like, how do Black people, who's, and again, don't be like, hi, Tyrone, did you see the game? Right. But make it authentic. Like, my mother loves bracelets and jewelry. And like, my mother's like, she hits all the craft fairs and, she has jewelry made in every kind of piece of wood, right? Like, and all this kind of stuff. Right. So it was an authentic conversation. And so that's one example. The second example that I want to bring up is that my mom's a cop watcher. And, she will, if she sees police doing anything, she pulls over, she stops, she watches. If we're walking down the street, we stop, we watch. And my mother lets it know that she's obviously doing this, right? As part of the intervention. And so an example is we were at a beach. So I'm originally from Hawaii. My mother lived in Hawaii for many, many years. And then she's just moved back to Hawaii to retire with my stepdad. And so we're at the beach, and some beaches are national parks. And so they have the park rangers or whatever they call it, working the beach. And there were these local kids, because in Hawaii, it's a different racial configuration. But so there were like these local Hawaiian, again, Black and brown bodies, right? Same story of colonization and exploitation and genocide. And so they were in a place that they shouldn't have been, and they were picking opihi, which is like this shell thing that grows on the coral, and you can like pick it up and suck it up and stuff like that. And so the park ranger walked past these two white women who were in the same space to go talk to the local folks about grabbing this opihi. And I watched my mother get up, and like, I stay back because I'm not white, right? So I'm like, let her do her thing. And she walks over to the park ranger, and she's like talking to them, and she's pointing, but then she starts pointing to these two white women who are sitting in the same spot. And, and she's like, saying whatever. And the next thing I know, the park ranger is walking over to those two white women. And my mother stands there to make sure those white women also have to leave, right? She's not just going to let it go. And so it was this moment of like Karen v. Karen, where like these other white women are like closing their stuff, and they're like looking at my mom, and, and my mom's just like, yeah, no, this is a heiau. You're not supposed to be here. That's why those local kids had to leave. So you need to leave too. Right. Like, and it all went down, it was all fine. Everyone left, like, and, and you could see like the local kids kind of enjoying this moment and like appreciating this haole lady. Haole is the word for white person. They had never really seen something like that before. The park ranger didn't really know what to do, right? Because it was this Karen v. Karen battle. And, he was just a white kid in the middle of it, right? Both look like his mother, and so those are examples of interventions, right? Like, when you see someone being treated differently than you, ask a question. If you call your police, or actually walk into your police station and ask them ask them about community policing. Ask them about, about how they work towards an anti-racist. They won't have any answers for you. But the point is that you will be reminding them that there are white people in this neighborhood who are going to care about that, right? And it's those small things. Like, when you're, listen to the podcast, Dear White Parents, go into the PTA and do the opposite of that, right? Yes, there's these big, broad things. Yes, vote for Obama, vote for Kamala, whatever. But it's the day-to-day, right? It's the day-to-day when you're in work, and, and you notice that there's no one of color above a certain pay grade. Ask that question. Now, will you get pushback? Yes. But as a woman of color who worries about her safety and her livelihood every day, it's literally the least you could do is to be uncomfortable for 20 minutes while you advocate for myself, right? Like, and I know I'm in a friendly environment, and Becky's anonymous, so this is what you guys are doing. And so I want to encourage you, like, yes, like, white people, the worst thing you can be is a race traitor, right? Like the worst thing you can be is a race traitor, but we need you to be a traitor on your race. I don't need allyship. I need you to be a traitor on your race. And if you do that, we'll actually get somewhere, right? Because there's no place to capitulate once you've rejected your whiteness.
And I think what's really helpful in hearing that message is how we have to understand that being a traitor to our race is being a traitor to racism, right? There's no white people without racism. We know race is a myth, doesn't exist, was only constructed for racialized capitalism. And so how do we help people understand that, this isn't about betraying your people. This is about saving your people. Like we often say in Becky's Anonymous, this is a real Noah's Ark moment. Like you either are getting you and your white people on this ark, or like you're going down. And literally when we talk about climate change, that this is our ark, and
Right.
it's going to evolve beyond us, but we're on that road to human extinction in a very real way.
That's right.
How much that's about the cannibalistic nature of racialized capitalism is
Yep.
ultimately going to kill us all.
That's
And
right.
so,
And another thing that I just want to throw in here as well is, this idea of the harm, right? So, Frederick Douglass talks about in his slave narratives that as his slave master, got more slaves and had to be more violent and that he also started drinking more and he started beating his wife and children, right? To propagate the violence of racism, it's so violent to the person as well, right? And I mean, we're seeing this now, like, I mean, white folks will just walk into schools and start shooting people up, and you know the white race, however, a whole nother okey doke, but we can have that, we can have that conversation at another time, is so sick, and it's because you've had to swallow this violence so that you could be slightly better than me, because ultimately most white folks aren't wealthy, they're not Jeff Bezos, right? They're working right alongside of me, but they're probably making 20 cents more an hour, or whatever it is, right? Like, so the fact that for that 20 cents and the hope of one day, maybe being able to be Jeff Bezos, which class tells you is not going to happen. Just be willing to give it up, right? Like just be willing to give it up. And I think that it's, so, I forget where I was totally going on that notion, but like,
well, I think we're talking about, what the cost is, and
right.
when
And
we
what it
talk about
costs you.
I think too, when we think about like being a traitor to your race, what are you actually giving up is actually like, and I think one of my favorite statistics, exactly to your point, and again, and I love that came from Frederick Douglass, because we can see that theme throughout the history of the evolution of our country's history, which is the evolution of racialized capitalism, is we look at early, while it's not researched very well for reasons we know why, early research so far shows us that police commit domestic violence at 2 to 4 times greater rates than the rest of the population. That's exactly to your point, right? The fact that police have to hold up white supremacy in this way means that they go home, right? When they're out in the streets terrorizing,
Right. They go home and beat their wives, right? They
they
beat
go
their
home to terrorize
children.
their families. And the point to this isn't to point at police now and say, you all are evil people. Again, it's to remind ourselves of what do white people lose when we buy into this white commodity and uphold.
That's right. That's
And,
right. And
and
there's
white women
actually,
in that.
that's right. That's right. And there's actually some interesting work that Constance Rice. So Constance Rice is Condoleezza Rice's first cousin. And she actually does, and I'm not sure what she's doing now, but 10 years ago, back when I was, working for Harry Belafonte, and what we were really trying to do is keep gangs intact, but help them create an economy, right? So like right now, gangs are a necessary thing in certain neighborhoods. They're going to protect you. They're going to help you get a job. They're going to help, like, I know it's seen as not, but it's actually that there's positive things to it as well for people who need that. But the problem is that they're just given illegal markets, all right? So they're giving drugs, guns, and women to sell, or people to sell. And so that ends up having a lot of violence. But like Homeboy Industries is a model. I was like, well, if we can give these kids a legitimate economy, they already have the hierarchical structure, right? They understand supply chains, right? They understand economics really, really well. And so that's when I came across Constance Rice, and she was working on this this effort with the police, with that exactly in mind, which was, she wanted to take the angle around, it's killing you all too. Like, if you don't care that it's killing us, which you don't, okay, fine. Let's talk about how your quality of life is poor. And let's talk about, again, the suicide rates, the violence rates amongst, or as we just saw, again, keeping it local, we had a police union chair who was raping children for 7 years. And because he was a cop, that could have been any, I mean, I don't know if, I think some of them may have been white children, right? So, so here we're now protecting cops in actually hurting your community because you need the police to keep me from you. So when you start actually breaking it down and dismantling it, you start seeing that it's unhealthy for everybody, right? White women don't get the same protections in domestic violence when they're, when a cop is the one who's abusing them, right? Children who are being molested don't get the same type of protection. When you look at Southie and Roxbury, right around like pre-busing, right? Like when Whitey Bulger was running Southie, like Southie had almost matching statistics to Roxbury when it came to, when it came to money, when it came to infant mortality, when it came to drug addiction, right? I mean, Whitey Bulger was getting everyone addicted. I mean, he was just that was his playground with Southie, right? And yet we would talk about the problems in Roxbury, but Whitey Bulger was allowed to terrorize Southie, right, for years. For years. I mean, I don't know if you all have watched the shows, right? But I mean, he was killing white folks, he was raping white folks, he was getting white folks addicted to heroin, right? Like, and yet all the focus was on, well, look at the drugs in Roxbury, look at the da-da-da in Roxbury, right? And so at the end of the day, Southie could have used the same types of social services, the same type of help, right? So I do think it's really important to remember that, and, when we talk about like, it being tax season, so many of your taxes are going to uphold white supremacy.
Our taxes did exactly what you just, it was our taxes that paid for his protection. It was our taxes that paid for the police unions, yeah.
Exactly, right? Exactly. The military, the draft, right? All of those things around that institutionalize Black and brown bodies. And so, it's worth even writing your city officials, right? Being like, this is what I want my tax dollars. Again, is it going to change the world? No, but that's not how the world changes. So, let's get off of, there's, one savior, da 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 da. It's about a shifting in culture, right? Everyone from Becky's Anonymous decides that they're going to, you guys could pool all your tax dollars, right? Every year and say that you're going to make, that you're going to make a friendly investment into a Black company, right? And so even if you have, if every year after your returns end up equaling, 20,000, it doesn't even have to be a lot. I will tell you that I had an accelerator program that outside of my time to run it cost me $3,000 a year to do. We've launched 30 businesses, the latest one being the Pearl, Black owned in the Seaport, owned by Luther and his wife, Tetta. Go and check it out. Spend money there, right? So $20,000 can go so far because we've always been making $1 out of 15 cents, right? And so look at where your money can go that can leverage change, that can encourage things like ownership, right? So yes, it's great to donate to charity. Charity's fine. My thing is, if we're talking about equity and capitalism, I don't want your charity because that means that you're always rich and I always got to ask for money. Why don't we make money together, right? Like get me in the ownership game, get me in the real economy game. And, so I would suggest as far as like, actual, ways of thinking about your power, and especially your economic power, that you look at how do we start modeling other how do we start modeling other examples, right, of ownership, of, like, think about Kuju, right? Like, think about, community economics, right? So there's this amazing group called Ujima. Like, does Becky's Anonymous have a fund that sits at Ujima? Ujima is a community underwritten, community-led investor circle, right? Can you guys have some money in there that they can give on your behalf? Now, mind your business, right? Let them do what they need to do. Just because you're giving them money, it doesn't mean that somehow you have more expertise than them. But those are ways, again, that you'll be supporting, right, something that's already there, that's already responding to the community. And so you just give them that little boost, right, of like, here's a little injection of some, adrenaline, or, steroids, or we need to think of a more positive, spin. But that's the power, right, that you all have. And so, whatever whatever you guys think about in how to do it, and what to do, make sure that you're giving it to a Black and brown hand and not an individual, right? Because, like, yes, like, there may be some individual who needs help. That's great. Like, help them too. But really, we're not going to get there by saving individual Black people.
Mhm.
Right? We're going to get there by including Black people into the system. And so the ways you can do that, and just a final example, like when I was at the bank, I was a regional president during COVID. And when COVID hit, I was like, what am I doing at a bank? Right? I was surrounded by white people who were like worried about, like, oh, are we closing branches? The interest rate sucks, right? Like, and I was watching all my organizing friends like go off into the night to organize, right? And to save people. And I called the CEO of the bank, who was the one who brought me in and was letting me, do my diversity stuff. And I said, I think I don't want to quit, but I just think I need to take a break so I can do some work. And he was like, you can't tell me that you're more powerful not being a regional bank president sitting on $1 billion P&L than you are not. He's like, I just don't, he's like, I'm sorry, call me, white, toxic masculinity, whatever. He's like, but right now, you're a bank president for Boston. Do what you want. Do what you want. And he's like, and you can't tell me that that's less powerful, right? So he challenged me in a certain way. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. So we were the first bank in Massachusetts. Well, first of all, let me say this. I put out a COVID fund before Baker did. It was a $3 million fund for Black, Brown, LGBTQ businesses. We were working with BECMA, Amplify Latinx, and the LGBTQ Chamber to help us. And what that fund was it was a line of credit. So even after COVID, they would have this credit line because most businesses need a line of credit. And because of banking, racism in banking, they can't get that. And so this was something that would last, post the pandemic, up to $50,000 with, looser considerations. We launched that. And we launched it, as I said, before Baker. Like when Baker said we're shutting down on Monday, I worked all weekend, working with BECMA, to create this, got it approved Monday morning. And before close of business on Monday, we came out saying, this is how we're supporting Black and brown businesses, It was so huge that I got calls from other local bank CEOs, asking me what I was doing, why I didn't bring it to the bigger group, right? Like all of this stuff. Not only that, when PPP started, I did the same thing, right? Like we knew PPP was coming. So I brought in the community again. And I said, listen, like you got to fill out this form. This is what you need, right? And we're going to do non-customers. So go and tell your people, right? And now they couldn't jump the line, but they could apply with us, which is, we don't need to jump the line. Just give us a shot. You know what I'm saying? Right? Like, and so all of a sudden we were banking non-customer PPP loans, right? We gained customers, right? We gained a lot of credibility. And and now as I'm working with the other banks. I'm back to being a diversity and inclusion consultant, working with other banks. And we were doing these focus groups, and folks were like, yeah, well, Berkshire Bank did da 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 da, right? Like, it was just for our reputation, like for our brand, it was smart business sense, is I guess what I'm saying, right? And it didn't cost us any money. I was doing a line of credit, right? It wasn't grants, our foundation was doing the grant stuff. I was doing the business side of it, right? We converted so many of those PPPs to become account holders, right? And I was just watching us just take clients from other banks, right? Like, because at the end of the day, Black people wanted to go somewhere, brown people wanted to go somewhere with folks who cared about them, right? And gave a shit about them. So, those are like the larger examples of like what you can do when you have power. And it was, I didn't, even as an organizer, I didn't realize what I could do until I was given permission.
Mhm. Awesome. I wanted to plug because I think you gave us a direct ask, and this is something that Becky's Anonymous has been thinking about. I want to plug for our membership that in addition to kind of the actions that we put out here, I do encourage people to consider all the things that you've laid out. Also, Surge has put like a kind of list in addition to what you said about like these direct things you can be putting money towards. But in addition to this tax season here at Becky's Anonymous, we are starting to have the foundation for our ongoing model of having what we're calling a reparation circle, which would be a circle of women of color who are taking the money that we've gotten from our membership on Patreon. So plug if you all want to become members of Patreon, taking that money to then transfer over to that reparation circle, which would then determine kind of how that money is used and what that model would look like. And I think it really hits the nail on the head of really challenging, particularly, which is in the charity model, which is very much this pay to play. If I write you a check for a lot of money, I somehow have bought a say in how that money is going to be used. And I think white people have a very hard time understanding why that is not the model. They're still very much like, if I write this check, that's bought me a say. And how do we go back to that quote of that you shared in the beginning of those closest to the pain must be closest to the power. And again, because that's the only way we'll find the solutions to this. That's right. Solutions for all of us.
That's right.
And it's in all of our best interest to have the leadership be from those who are most effective. And then there will be the true trickle down effect, right? When we see those people doing better, it trickles down to all of us. So thank you so much for those words, and want to plug again, just continuing this conversation, especially, we look to people like you to see how do we're building this all together. How do we continue to build, not reinvent the wheel, and really make sure our impact matches, what our intention is. So I wanted to thank you so much for all of this. I think we have like 10 more live streams that we could do out of all of this. I wanted to just give you a moment to share any last moments, and then I'll share our closing quote, just that kind of helps us all leave today with kind of the kernel of kind of what we want everybody to walk away with. But
definitely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and just think it's so important that white folks, and especially white women, get into their own spaces to find their power and to help dismantle some of this stuff. So it's such a pleasure to be here. And, anyone, look me up at Malia Lazu on my socials, get in touch. But I think the thing that I really just want to drive home with, all of us, is that the fact of the matter is that we can change all of this, that another world is possible, but it's not possible if we're just going to wait for our elected officials. DC is the outcome of 50 states. And so it's what we do in our states that matters. And, and I'll throw you out a quote, and it's a cisgendered white man, straight white man quote, but it's such a powerful quote because I think it gets at the heart of why we've had such trouble making change. And it's a Peter Drucker quote, and that is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So don't worry about your strategy, because right now America's racist culture is going to kill it. Work on changing the American culture, and then all of these strategies will flow from that.
And culture starts with our families, right? And looking to those most immediately around us.
Exactly. You guys are the ones raising the white men. Do it better.
I appreciate that point, and that's the hardest work, though, right? Is that so? So again, thank you so much. We look forward to continuing to build with you, and thank you so much for all your tremendous work. And just want to leave us all with this last quote. So this is from Ruha Benjamin, author of Race After Technology. And these words are: remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within. So thank you for helping us understand what that means. And thank you for your
Thank
time today.
you.
And thank you all for sharing with us on this live stream, and look forward to seeing you all at our Growth Circle this Wednesday and our intro circles next month. Thank you all.